Hello, everyone, and welcome to Week 4 of Finlandia University's Philosophy 212 Ethics course offered in fall 2020. This is Dr. Patricia Gross, and I will be your professor this week. We're moving on to a new unit, as you should probably know. It's Unit 2, What is Ethics? Major Ethical Theories. In the next 4 weeks, you'll be reading primary philosophical texts from the history of ethics. And here are your assignments for this week. This week, you're going to be reading Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics and attending the Zoom class. You'll have a video to watch and the series of discussion board assignments to complete. In this little short mini lecture, I'm going to go over some of these slides that you have access to on the course website just to show you. If you go to the course website, you can see Unit 1, and then you go all the way down, you'll see Unit 2, and the slides are right here. Without further ado, let's get going. In week 1, we discussed Plato's Euthyphro, in which Socrates and his friend Euthyphro have a conversation about the nature of piety. If only we knew what it was, we would always know right from wrong. We are now moving a few decades forward in time to discuss Aristotle. Let's look at this slide. Aristotle was a student of Plato, founder of the Peripatetic school in Athens. It's kind of like a college. Peripatetic is a very fancy word for saying walking. So they would walk around and talk. When reading Aristotle, you should keep in mind that a lot of what he's doing is outlining and critiquing what people have said before him. He is immensely influential to Western thought, and our conception of formal logic, for example, comes from him. And for further resources about Plato, you can check out this link that's right here from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. So, the reading for today comes from the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle's work on ethics. Nicomachean refers to his son Nicomachus. In your reading, he argues that happiness is the purpose of all human action. Let's think about what that means. Why do you do anything at all? Why are you in this class? When you eat something delicious, how do you feel? Why do you like your favorite hobby? If you're in a sport, why bother? Isn't it difficult? Raising children is really, really hard. Why do it? There are so many different kinds of answers to these questions, but ultimately, for Aristotle, it boils down to the simple fact that we do things, even unpleasant things, because they will help us be happy. On a personal note, why do I scoop my cat's litter box? Because it's my duty, or because if the cats are unhappy, then I'll be unhappy, and if it's stinky, then I'll also be unhappy. If I want my cats happy, why don't I let Loki exclusively eat kitten food? Because it would kill him, and then I would be very unhappy. For Aristotle, happiness is not the same thing as joy. Here's the definition Aristotle gives for what happiness is: an activity of the soul in accordance with virtue, and if there is more than one form of virtue, in accordance with the best and most complete. Happiness is not when you are overwhelmed with emotion. It is quite the opposite. In fact, happiness for Aristotle, you might say, is more akin to contentedness, balance. Okay, so happiness is the most important thing. How do we get there? Well, through ethics, of course, because virtue, as you may know, has to do with ethics. But how do you be virtuous? So basically, in order to be happy, you have to be virtuous, right? In order to be virtuous, you have to be an ethical person, right? Let's figure out what that looks like. Aristotle's theory in Nicomachean Ethics is a type of ethics we know as virtue ethics. This is neither consequentialist or non-consequentialist, like we talked about last week. Rather, it emphasizes a person's individual virtues or moral character, as well as the idea that happiness is the goal of life and virtue is the way of attaining that happiness. Let's sink that in. I'm sorry, that was wrong. Let that sink in. Happiness is your goal. Virtue is the only way to attain it. Virtue is individual to you. How does that even work? The virtue is individual to you. Just to give a little bit of a telescope, or I'm gonna show you what's gonna happen later. It's the means between the extremes, but we'll talk about that soon. So, this is the link to the video that you're going to be watching that's going to really help you learn more about Aristotle's virtue ethics. Again, how do you be happy? You be virtuous. What is virtue? It has to do with you. Here's a quote from the introduction of the text. Virtue ethics is a school of thought that takes moral excellence or virtue to be the proper focus of reflection on ethics. For adherents of this position, rules for actions are derivative of the virtues, that is, they come from the virtues. Okay, so the goal of life is to be happy. Happiness is not a wild emotion, it's a stable one. How do we get happy? Virtue. Virtue is what's going to help us to be happy. Every action we do should be virtuous. If so, we'll be happy. The next 3 slides give a rundown of each of the chapters of the Nicomachean Ethics you read. Please note I didn't write all of these, and there are many helpful guides to the text online. I think these came from Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. The 13 chapters of book 1, I'm not going to go over them, but they have different, this is just like a quick rundown of every single chapter, the main point of every single chapter. And we learned some things like, for example, happiness needs some prosperity. That is, you need to have a little bit of money, right? You have to have enough. We learned things like a virtuous person engages in virtuous activity and contemplation throughout life. Therefore, they're happy throughout their life, right? But we're going to focus on chapter 13, right? Because it's relevant to book 2. Since happiness is an activity of soul in accordance with the perfect virtue, we must consider the nature of virtue, for perhaps we shall thus see better the nature of happiness. So Aristotle gets to the idea that virtue is how we be happy. But what is virtue? Well, there's 2 major kinds. There's moral virtue and there's intellectual virtue. And one of the important things to consider is how you can even know either kind, right? Moral virtue, you don't learn it through someone telling you what right and wrong is. You learn that through habit. Intellectual virtue is kind of like your ability to study well, right? And those intellectual virtues are things that you can learn. But moral virtue, an example I like to give is this. I was at Walmart when I first moved in to the area, and I picked up a bath bomb. It was on sale. It was like this huge glittery bath bomb. I was so excited about it. And I put it in my cart, and I bought a bunch of other stuff. And the problem is the bath bomb was kind of a gray with glitter, so it kind of was the same color-ish of the cart. And so when I checked out, I didn't see the bath bomb, even though that little robot says, check your cart before you leave. And I totally didn't see it. And then as I'm leaving, I'm almost at my car, I look down, and I see it in the cart. And then I'm like, stop there. And I'm like, crap, I've taken this, I've stolen it. And so what I did was I walked back in and I put it back. And I'm going to return to this example a little bit later, but that's an example of moral virtue. I couldn't be taught by someone teaching me, as in a professor teaching me that you have to return the thing. It came from within. Like I had to return it. And a part of that was the habits that I grew up doing when I was a child. I was taught certain habits of returning things, don't steal, that kind of thing. So we'll get to exactly what that means in a second. So again, intellectual virtues come from learning and moral virtues come from habit. Moral virtues are destroyed by both deficiency, that is not having enough, and by excess, that is having too much. Okay, what does it mean that moral virtues are destroyed by having too little or too much? Well, it's actually kind of tricky. If we go back to the bath bomb, for example, if I were to not go and return the bath bomb, then I wouldn't have the moral virtue. I wouldn't have enough to be virtuous, right? But if I went and made a huge scene and like found the manager and admitted to stealing from Walmart and calling the police on myself because I stole a bath bomb, that is just too much of that nonsense, right? That's too much honesty, right? There's such a thing as like being a bit obscene or a bit weird about stuff, and that would be kind of weird, right? But instead, I kind of went to the middle ground and I just returned it, right? I just put it back on the shelf. To move on to number 3, virtue and pleasure. Moral excellence is concerned with pleasures and pain. It hurt me to return the bath bomb, but I am a happier person now because I don't have that on my conscience. Virtuous acts, this is chapter 4 of book 2. Virtuous acts require A, knowing what you're doing, B, willing the action for its own sake, and C, proceeding from a fixed and settled disposition, right? So I knew that I needed to return the bath bomb because I knew it was wrong to have stolen it. Even though it was accidental. I wanted to do the action for its own sake. I didn't want to return it for any other reason. I didn't need to do it for any other reason. I didn't even have to do it at all, right? But I just wanted to do the right thing and return it. So I chose to do that thing. And then it proceeded from a fixed and settled disposition. It wasn't an action of wildness. It was a calm decision that I went and at first I was like, I don't want to go back in, but I did go back in and return the thing. So let's talk more about chapter 7. And this is the really tough one, right? In chapter 7, we get to learn a lot more what it means by virtues being destroyed by deficiency and by excess. So the chart of the virtues that he gives this physical chart, isn't there? This physical chart. There are many of these charts that are in different colors and shapes online, right? What he says in chapter 7 is that the virtues have to do with feelings, right? Fear and confidence, pleasure and pain, with external goods, money in small amounts, money in large amounts, honor and dishonor, with social life, anger, truth-telling, pride and humor. The corresponding virtues to these things are bravery, temperance, generosity, magnificence, magnanimity, violence, truthfulness, wit, friendliness. Okay, that's a lot, right? So if we look at this chart of the virtues, right, there's the sphere, as in like the circle, the earth is a sphere, right? There's a sphere of action or feeling, right? And then there's the virtuous part in relation to the sphere. And then there's there's too much excess and there's too little deficiency, right? So if we look at fear and confidence, right, that's its own sphere of action or feeling. You can understand that, right? If you have too much confidence, right, that is not enough fear, then you would act rashly. An example of this is if I was out watching a football game at Finlandia and I saw that they lost their linebacker who got hurt or whatever, and I, Dr. Patricia Gross, who's never been in a sport before, decided that I'm courageous enough that I'm going to go and help everybody. I'm so confident I'm going to go out into the team and be a linebacker. That would be a bit absurd, right? That would actually be rash. I'd be too much confidence, so much confidence that it would be reckless, right? Now, if you yourself were a football player and you saw a linebacker and had the ability to go out and help in this circumstance if someone had gotten injured, well, if you didn't do it and you didn't help, then you would be a coward, right? You'd be having too much fear, not enough confidence. So the mean is courage for this kind of action. I should know my place and that I should not be a football player and I'm just going to stay right here and not play, right? Well, I'm acting courageously. But you, the football player, knowing that you can going out to help would be appropriate. Your confidence is appropriate. If you're a linebacker, you could go out and help and be a pitching linebacker, right? And that would show courage as well. So it's both of us showing the same exact virtue by doing something totally different in the same circumstance, right? Now, here's something, pleasure and pain. Too much pleasure is something called licentiousness. It's being too wild and crazy. Not enough is insensibility. And just the right is temperance, right? So, for example, you might think of this in terms of studying, right? If you have finals coming up, midterms coming up, right? So the appropriate thing to do is to study, right? Well, some of your friends are going to want you to party all the time, right? Like you got to come out every night. It's fun, right? But then say you're studying, say you take the exam and it's the night of the exam, the night after the exam, it would be kind of silly to not go celebrate, right? It's important to actually have some sorts of celebrations in your life and that you're not just a student all the time. You should actually have fun sometimes, right? So not having enough fun in this case, not having enough pleasure goes to deficiency, and having too much goes into licentiousness. Now, for some people, they can go out a little bit more often but still be able to do well in studying, right? Some people really can't go out if they have a problem with alcohol, so they might be more on, their temperance would be not going out too much at all. So it really does depend on the individual. And going to here, from chapter 8, the mean between the extremes is what is virtuous, But the mean is always relevant to us individually. This is why virtue ethics is neither non-consequentialist or consequentialist, because it has to do with more my own individual character, right? If we look at let's look at conversation, right? There are people that are witty. Look, we've got buffoonery is too much, wittiness is just right, and boorishness is deficiency, right? So this has to do with your sense of humor, right? If you're ridiculous all the time, you're kind of a buffoon, right? Especially if you're ridiculous in inappropriate circumstances. But you don't want to be the kind of person that's boring and never can take a joke, right? So you want to be in some mean between the two extremes of buffoonery and boorishness. But the mean is going to be relative to you and also relative to the situation. Sometimes if you're with your friends, you might be closer to this side. But if you're at your grandmother's funeral, you're probably going to be closer to this side, right? So it depends on the context and depends on you yourself. And the same thing goes with something like shame. Having too much shame is not good because you're super shy and you never talk to anyone. But then having no shame, shamelessness, is really bad. Like, you get people that are just kind of like all over the place and showing all their stuff and being kind of ridiculous people. And by bad, I mean they're not going to be happy. Like, there's no contentedness in this sort of wild behavior. And you're a lot less happy if you're so shy you never allow yourself to feel anything, right? So the mean between the two extremes of shyness and shamelessness is modesty. And again, modesty is going to be different for different people. Sometimes people feel more comfortable on this side. Maybe they talk less in class. Maybe they wear more conservative clothing. And then there's people on this side that are a little bit closer to this edge, right? But again, Sunday night dinner with your mom and your grandparents and stuff like that, you might be a little bit more modest, a little bit more reserved. But then when you're out with your friends on Saturday night, maybe you'll have a little bit more fun, right? But it's relevant to you. The virtuous action is relevant to you and the situation. And the idea is if you can find the mean between the extremes of excess and deficiency, you can be happy, right? And the big thing is just not giving yourself things to be upset about later. How many of you wake up sometimes at 3 a.m. and think about that one thing you said that was really dumb? We all do it sometimes, right? Where you're like, oh, I can't believe I did this thing. Well, if you were to learn through habit of making a choice of the mean between two extremes, you learn this type of virtuous behavior, this moral virtue, then you won't be woken up at night by things that you've done, right? So week 4 discussion board. That was just a quick overview. Obviously, we're going to go over in class as well. This is just the lecture to kind of review everything. And so let's look at the week 4 discussion board. It's on this slide, but I've also got it queued up here. For this discussion board post, you must explore the readings from Aristotle by means of an example. Choose one of the two ethical situations below and conclusion listed below. Choose one of the two ethical situations and conclusions below. Then explain how the conclusion does or does not follow Aristotle's virtue ethics using direct citations from the text in order to support your claims that you should define and explain what Aristotle means by happiness, virtue, etc. So the first situation you can choose from is your best friend Thomas is cheating on his girlfriend Sarah with her best friend Clara. Conclusion, you tell Sarah what Thomas is up to. Does it follow or not follow Aristotle's virtue ethics? Number 2, situation B. You are the CEO of a small company and through several strange circumstances end up gaining control of the patent for a little used but life-saving drug. The drug is used to help children with a rare kidney disorder, and only 1.5% of children born in the U.S. have this disorder. Conclusion, you raise the price of the drug by 5,000% from a $1 pill to a $5,000 pill. Does this or does this not follow Aristotle's virtue ethics, and why? Your original post is due, it says Tuesday. Let's make that due Wednesday, huh? That'd be nice. Or no, it's actually due Thursday. Okay. So your original post is due Thursday at 11:59 p.m., and then you must respond to at least 3 of your classmates' posts by Friday at 11:59 p.m. And the way I can do that, I can require peer reviews, automatically assign peer reviews, and then that's going to be due on, what day is this? Sunday, a day. I think this is this week right here. So the Friday the 18th, I think. I really hope, yeah. So it's due. So the board is due or Thursday the 17th, and the peer review is due on September 18th. Okay, that's it for today. And for next time, we're going to be moving on to, I believe, utilitarianism, which is always fun. And I will see you next. I'll see you in class. All right, bye.